The Alpha King and his army saw a young Omega battling alone. What they saw shocked them all. Lightning split the heavens, illuminating jagged rocks and twisted trees that clawed at the wind like desperate hands. In the midst of this storm, the Alpha King, Valerian, rode at the front of his army, his dark armor gleaming wetly in the flashes of lightning. Valerian's horse moved with a silent authority, muscles rippling under him, as though the beast itself understood the weight of the mission. His army trailed behind, disciplined and precise, their faces set like stone. They were heading to retrieve the sacred relic stolen months ago by a cabal of rogue sorcerers who had cursed the valley. Many who entered here never returned. As the army pressed forward, a strange sight struck Valerian's sharp eyes. Between the flashes of lightning, he saw a figure, small, yet standing against a tide of monstrous shadows that clawed at the earth. The figure moved with agility and determination, wielding a blade that glimmered faintly with enchanted light. "Hold," Valerian commanded, raising a hand. His voice carried over the storm like a dark melody. "Do not approach. Let us watch." His soldiers hesitated, uncertain, but the order came from the king himself. Valerian's eyes narrowed. There was something about the lone fighter. Courage, yes, but something more. A strength that defied the storm, the monsters, even fate itself. The young Omega, for that is what she was, moved with fluid precision. Every step, every swing of her blade, was a calculated act of defiance against the creatures that surged toward her. She was small, barely towering over the shadows that twisted and grew from the darkness itself, yet she wielded power like a storm contained in a fragile human form. Valerian felt an unusual pull in his chest. He was a king, a warrior accustomed to commanding armies, to facing overwhelming odds, to holding the line against enemies who outnumbered him tenfold. And yet, he felt awe and something else, staring at this lone Omega battling for her life. "Who is she?" his second-in-command whispered. His voice trembled despite his training. "A sorcerer, a spirit." "Neither," Valerian replied softly, eyes fixed on the young warrior. "She is more alive than anything I have seen in this valley for a long time." The shadows surged. The creatures lunged with talons and fangs, screeching with voices that seemed almost human in their cruelty. The Omega spun, her blade a silver arc of light, cutting through the nearest shadows. Her movements were desperate but precise. She was fighting not just to survive but to protect something, something unseen in the gloom. Lightning struck close, illuminating her face for a moment. Valerian's breath caught. She was young, perhaps no more than 17 winters, and her hair plastered to her face, eyes wide, fierce, unyielding. There was fear there, yes, but more than that, a stubborn defiance. A refusal to bow to darkness, even when every force in the valley seemed determined to crush her. Then came the moment that would change everything. A monstrous shadow, larger than the rest, surged forward, faster and deadlier than the others. The Omega stumbled as it closed in, a creature born of nightmare itself. Her blade met it and sparks flew, but it was clear she could not hold for long. The creatures swarmed around her, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Valerian's hand tightened on the reins. His instincts screamed at him to ride forward, to command his soldiers to descend, to save her. But he did not. He did not move, not yet. There was a reason, though he could not name it aloud. He needed to see who this young Omega truly was. He needed to understand the fire that drove her, the power that shone from her even in the teeth of death. The creatures pressed closer. She faltered. One massive claw slashed across her side, and she stumbled to the ground. The army behind Valerian let out a collective gasp. Even hardened warriors flinched. Valerian's heart thundered. Without thinking, he spurred his horse forward, breaking through the hesitant ranks of his soldiers. Rain lashed his face, lightning danced across his armor, but he only saw her. The Omega struggled to rise, her hands trembling as she gripped her blade. She looked up just as Valerian reached her. Time seemed to slow. The storm howled, and the shadows froze for a heartbeat, as though they too understood the moment's weight. Valerian dismounted in a single fluid motion. The mud swallowed his boots as he moved beside her, standing between the Omega and the monstrous shadow. His sword shimmered with a faint magic, a radiance of authority and power. He struck once, twice, each swing precise and lethal. The shadows screamed and dissipated under the combined force of King and Omega. When the last shadow dissolved into mist, the valley fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the rain and the distant roll of thunder. Valerian looked down at her. She was breathing heavily, sweat and rain mingling on her skin, hair plastered across her face. She met his gaze, defiance still flickering in her eyes, but also something new, recognition. Surprise, perhaps. "You fought well," Valerian said, his voice low, carrying both respect and a strange curiosity. "More than anyone should be able to. Who are you?" The Omega's lips parted, but no words came. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing. Finally she spoke, her voice small yet firm. "Someone who refuses to die," she said. Valerian's lips curved into a shadow of a smile. "Then you have spirit," he said, "and spirit is rare in these lands." The storm seemed to quiet slightly, as if acknowledging the brief moment of peace. But Valerian knew better. This valley did not forgive. It did not release its claws easily. And she was still vulnerable. "Can you stand?" he asked. His tone was more than polite, it was measured, commanding, yet there was a subtle offer of trust. She nodded, though wobbly, and he extended a hand. Her eyes flickered with hesitation. Trust was dangerous, and kings were not to be trusted lightly. But something about him, his presence, the calm certainty that he exuded, the way he had arrived without hesitation, made her grasp his hand. He pulled her up gently but firmly, and for a moment their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, an unnameable understanding that they were not ordinary people. Fate had a cruel sense of humor to throw them together in this storm. The army, still watching, whispered among themselves. None had expected the king to intervene. None had imagined that anyone could withstand the darkness alone, let alone a young Omega. But here she was, standing beside the Alpha King, muddy, bleeding, but unbroken. "Let us move," Valerian said. "The Cabal will not wait, and neither should we." As they rode through the valley, side by side, the storm began to lift, though the clouds remained heavy and ominous. Lightning still danced on the horizon, and the shadows that had attacked before seemed to linger at the edges of vision, watching, waiting. The young Omega, Ilara, as she finally whispered her name, felt something strange stir within her. A connection, tentative and fragile but undeniably present. She did not yet understand it, could not name it, but she felt the pull toward the king beside her. He was formidable, frightening, and compelling. And Valerian, for all his experience, for all his battles and victories, felt something he had not felt in years. Intrigue, curiosity, and perhaps a shadow of something deeper. The storm within the valley mirrored the storm within him, and he knew that this young Omega was a force that could not be ignored. The first part of the journey had ended, but the path ahead promised more danger, more darkness, and more revelations. As the army disappeared into the mist, Ilara's gaze met Valerian's once more. Both understood, in that unspoken moment, that this was only the beginning, and that the bond formed in the heart of the storm would change both of their fates forever. The shadows of the valley had not yet vanished, and somewhere in the darkness, a whisper carried on the wind. "She is not just a girl. She is the key, and the reckoning will come." And in that instant, Valerian's heart tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of knowing that everything would change from this night onward. The fortress of Valerian rose from the cliffs like a black crown, its stone walls slick with rain and moss. Torches flickered in the corridors, casting long shadows that danced across the carved faces of past kings and queens. The army had returned from the cursed valley, But Alara still trembled beneath her cloak, her arms aching from the fight and her heart still pounding from the encounter with the shadow beasts. Valerian led her through the main gate with the same quiet authority he wielded on the battlefield. Guards bowed as they passed, eyes wary but respectful. No one dared speak without his permission, and yet even they could sense the strange presence of the young Omega beside their king. In the infirmary, the scent of herbs and antiseptics was sharp. Healer women moved silently around Alara, tending to cuts and bruises, murmuring words of comfort that barely reached her ears. She had never been in a place like this before, so grand, so filled with power and danger, and yet the fear she felt was mingled with awe. "You will heal," Valerian said, his voice low, carrying over the soft bustle of the infirmary. "But not alone. I will not allow it." Alara's eyes widened. She was used to standing alone, relying on her own strength. Being cared for felt strange and unsettling. But there was no argument in her, not when the pain in her side reminded her of the claw that had nearly ended her life. "You are different from anyone I have met," Valerian said, almost to himself. His eyes lingered on her, studying the way she shifted uneasily under the healer's hands. Strong, defiant, and yet fragile. "I'm fine," Alara said, though her voice was quiet, almost fragile itself. She wanted to stand tall to show him she was not weak. But the truth pressed against her chest. She was tired, and the fight in the valley had drained more than her body. It had left her mind restless, buzzing with questions she did not yet understand. Valerian regarded her silently, as though weighing the words she could not say. He had seen many warriors fall, many kings betrayed, many sorcerers turn against their own. But there was something about this girl, something that made him uneasy, intrigued, and cautious. "Do not think that because you survived the valley you are safe," he said finally. "The danger has only begun. There are those who would see you broken or worse." Alara's brow furrowed. "Broken? Why, I fought to survive." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because there is power in you that you do not yet understand. And power in this kingdom is both a blessing and a curse." Her hands trembled as she tried to absorb his words. She had felt something strange during the battle, a surge of energy she could not explain. Her blade had burned brighter, her movements sharper, faster, stronger. And yet it had frightened her as much as it had saved her. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. "Power," Valerian's gaze darkened. "Some are born with it, some gain it through blood or sacrifice, and some inherit it from the old magic that still runs through these lands. You are not ordinary, Alara. That is why I brought you here. That is why I did not let the shadows claim you." The words pressed against her heart. She had lived all her life as a nobody, someone to be overlooked, someone to survive in silence. And now to hear that she was special, that she held power unknown even to herself, it was terrifying. The healer finished bandaging her wounds, and Valerian gestured for her to follow him. They moved through the hallways of the fortress, torches casting long, flickering shadows. Every corner, every archway seemed alive with history. Statues of kings and queens glared down at them with stern eyes, as if judging the young Omega for daring to walk among the powerful. They entered a private chamber, sparsely decorated but elegant. A large window overlooked the cliffs and the dark sea beyond, waves crashing against rocks far below. Valerian gestured for her to sit, and she obeyed, though she fidgeted nervously. "I will train you," he said finally, "but not as a soldier. You will learn control, understanding, discipline. Your strength is dangerous if left unchecked." Alara nodded slowly. "I don't even know where to begin." "Then we begin here," he said, his gaze steady and firm. "With trust." The word made her pause. Trust. She had trusted no one for most of her life. Yet, standing here with him, this king who had saved her, who spoke of her power with a mixture of fear and respect, something shifted inside her. Perhaps she could trust him. Perhaps she had no choice. Days passed in the fortress like a strange, slow dream. Valerian had her practice basic control, focusing her energy into small movements, simple tasks, then gradually more complex ones. At first she failed, overreaching, letting the energy flare uncontrollably. Objects shook and clattered, torches flickered, and sometimes, in her frustration, she cried silently into her hands. And each time Valerian was there. Not with scolding or anger, but with patience, guidance, and a quiet insistence. "You cannot force it," he told her one evening, as they practiced in the great training hall. Rain tapped against the glass high above. "You must learn to let it flow, to understand it, to respect it. Power without control is destruction." Ilara's voice trembled. "I don't know if I can. I almost. She stopped herself, shivering. She had nearly hurt herself in the valley, nearly let the shadows consume her. "You can," he interrupted gently but firmly, "because you are stronger than you think, and because you have survived what no one else could. That means something. That proves something." She looked up at him, searching his eyes for the truth. For the first time she saw not just the king, the warrior, the man feared by all, but a person who understood struggle. A person who had fought his own battles, faced his own darkness. The fortress was not entirely safe. Rumors swirled among the courtiers, whispers of the strange girl who had survived the valley, who had walked into the king's court as though fate itself had guided her. Some saw her as a threat, others saw her as a pawn. And some looked at her with envy, their own ambitions stirred by her presence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind dark clouds, painting the sky with bruised colors, a message arrived. A noble of the court had intercepted a letter from the cabal that had cursed the valley. The words were simple but chilling. "She is not what she seems. The power you protect will bring ruin, not salvation." Valerian read the letter carefully, his brow furrowed. He looked at Ilara, who watched him with quiet anxiety. "They know of your power," he said, "and they will not rest until it is theirs or destroyed." Ilara's hands tightened into fists. "Then we fight," she whispered, though a tremor ran through her voice. She had never imagined this life for herself, training under a king, fighting shadows she barely understood, but the fire in her heart would not let fear control her. Valerian studied her, and for the first time he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Good. But remember this, not all battles are fought with strength. Some require patience, cunning, and trust. Even in the darkest hours, you must trust yourself and trust me." Night fell over the fortress, the wind moaning through the towers. Ilara stood by the window, looking out at the cliffs and the dark sea, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. Her body had healed, but her mind raced with questions. Who was she, truly? Why had fate brought her here, to this king, to this fortress? And most of all, what would happen when her power could no longer be contained? Valerian entered silently, standing behind her. "The shadows are not gone," he said. "They wait for weakness, for hesitation, and so must we." Ilara's shoulders stiffened. "I will not fail." "I do not doubt that," he replied, his voice softer now. "But you must understand, failure is not always about falling. Sometimes it is about learning, surviving, and rising stronger." For a moment, silence fell between them, broken only by the distant crash of waves. And then from the corridors of the fortress came a faint, strange sound, a whisper carried on the wind, so soft that Ilara barely heard it. "The storm is not over. The reckoning approaches." She turned to Valerian, eyes wide. He followed her gaze, his expression hardening. Something was moving in the shadows of his own fortress. Something that knew her power, that sought to test it, and perhaps to destroy them both. Valerian's hand brushed against hers, not in command, but in warning, in connection. The first flicker of understanding passed between them. They were not alone, and the trials ahead would demand everything from both of them: strength, courage, and trust in ways neither had yet imagined. The night deepened, and the fortress held its breath. Outside, the wind carried whispers of danger, of secrets long buried, and of a power that would change the kingdom forever. Ilara clenched her fists. She was no longer just a survivor. She was something more, something the world had yet to see. And beside her the Alpha King waited, ready to face whatever shadows dared to rise against them. The first days of training, of understanding, had ended, but the real battle, the one for trust, power, and destiny, was only beginning. And somewhere in the silent halls of the fortress, eyes watched. The Omega's power had already drawn attention, and not all who watched intended well. The hook lingered in the air. The shadows were waiting, and the storm had only just begun. The forest stretched before them like a living wall of green, dark and unyielding. Ancient trees loomed over the path, their twisted branches entwined as if to block the sky. Mist clung to the ground, curling around roots and rocks like spectral fingers. Rain had ceased, but the air was thick and heavy with the scent of moss and earth. Somewhere deep in the forest, a distant howl echoed, a reminder that danger lurked even here, far from the cursed valley. Valerian led the way, his armor muted under the forest's dim light. He moved silently, every step measured, every sense alert. Behind him, Ilara followed, her cloak damp, her hands gripping the hilt of her sword. Though she had trained under him for days, and though the fortress had offered her safety, the forest was another test. Here the power within her pulsed like a living thing, unpredictable and raw. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Valerian glanced at her, his sharp eyes catching the glint of uncertainty in her gaze. "I do. The forest has a mind of its own. It reacts to fear, to anger, to power." Ilara swallowed. "My power," he nodded. "Yes, you are stronger than you know, and the forest knows it." The trees seemed to lean closer as they moved deeper. Shadows shifted unnaturally and the air grew colder. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine, not from the chill, but from the sense that the forest was alive, watching, waiting. "Remember what I told you," Valerian said, his voice steady, grounding. "Control, understanding, discipline. Fear feeds the darkness. Trust yourself." She nodded, trying to steady her breath. The forest was testing her already, and she had not even faced its true challenge. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch underfoot or the distant rustle of leaves. The path twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing into a tunnel of roots and hanging moss, other times opening into glades where light filtered weakly through the canopy. Then, without warning, the shadows in one glade grew heavier, darker, as though the trees themselves were bending to form a barrier. A chill wind swept through, carrying whispers that seemed to echo inside Ilara's mind. "Stay close," Valerian commanded. His hand brushed against hers, not a touch of romance yet, but of reassurance, a silent signal that she was not alone. From the darkness emerged shapes, figures of mist and shadow, indistinct but menacing. Their forms twisted and shifted, almost human, almost beast. Ilara felt the pulse of her power quicken. The forest responded to her fear, her hesitation. If she could not control it, the shadows would consume her, and perhaps even Valerian. She gripped her sword tighter. I will not let them win," she said, though her voice wavered. Valerian nodded, stepping beside her. "Then trust yourself, Ilara, and trust me." The shadows lunged. Ilara moved instinctively, her sword flashing in arcs of silver light. Her power flared, small tendrils of energy reaching out and dissipating the mist around them. But the shadows were persistent, shaping themselves into new forms, testing her limits. Valerian fought alongside her, precise and commanding. His sword moved with elegance and lethal grace, cutting through the darkness as though slicing through the air itself. And yet even his strength could not contain the shadows for long. They pressed, testing, probing, forcing both of them to act as one. Breathing heavily, Ilara realized something terrifying. The shadows were drawn to her. Not her sword, not her movements, but the power that surged within her. The realization made her chest tighten. If she lost control, she could destroy everything, including the one person who had become her anchor in this strange new life. Focus, Valerian barked, noticing her faltering. His voice cut through the fear. Control, Ilara, not force, not anger, control. She closed her eyes, drawing on the lessons he had taught her. The storm inside her, the wild, raw energy, was a living thing. It responded to her emotions, to her intent. Slowly, she learned to guide it, to shape it without letting it overwhelm her. A pulse of light surged from her sword, and the shadows recoiled, twisting back into nothingness. For a heartbeat, the forest fell silent. "You see," Valerian said, his tone both approving and cautious. "You have the power to shape your destiny, but you must always respect it." Ilara's chest heaved. She had survived the shadows, but more importantly, she had survived herself. For the first time, she felt not fear but confidence, quiet, steady, and dangerous. Hours later, they reached a clearing where an ancient stone circle stood, half buried in moss and vines. The stones hummed with magic, faint pulses of light flickering along their surfaces. Valerian's expression grew serious. "This is where we begin," he said. "The curse that resides within you, it is tied to the old magic of these lands. To control it, you must face it here." Ilara looked at the stones, feeling the hum of power beneath her feet. It was alluring, terrifying, and overwhelming all at once. She wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the fortress, to forget that such a burden had been thrust upon her. But she could not. She was here and she was ready, or so she told herself. Valerian stepped closer. "You are not alone," he reminded her. "This is not a test of strength alone. It is a test of heart, mind, and spirit." Ilara nodded, drawing in a deep, steadying breath. She stepped into the circle, feeling the pulse of magic awaken beneath her. Images flashed before her eyes, visions of destruction, of shadows consuming the kingdom, of faces she did not recognize. Her power surged, responding to the fear, the uncertainty. A figure appeared in the center of the vision, tall, dark, and imposing. It was not real, yet it felt alive. The figure spoke, though no words reached her ears. The message was clear: surrender and all will be lost. Resist, and the path will be harder than anything she has known. Valerian's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "You are stronger than you know, Ilara. Do not let fear control you. Your power is a part of you, but you are the master of it, not the other way around." She closed her eyes and let his words anchor her. Slowly she felt the surge of energy within her respond, not with chaos but with clarity. The shadows in the vision wavered, twisting, then dissolving entirely. Light filled the circle, warm and steady. When she opened her eyes, the forest seemed brighter, less threatening. The mist had lifted slightly and the path forward was clearer. Valerian looked at her with something new in his expression. Respect, yes, but also admiration. "You did well," he said quietly. "Not many could have faced the darkness and controlled it. You are remarkable." Ilara's cheeks flushed. She had never thought of herself as remarkable. Always small, always alone, always overlooked. And yet here she was, standing in the heart of an ancient forest, her power finally under her control, her destiny beginning to take shape. The bond between them had deepened, though neither spoke of it. In the shared silence of their journey, in the trials of shadow and magic, they had learned to rely on one another, to trust one another. It was a delicate, unspoken connection, one built on mutual respect, shared danger, and a growing understanding that neither could face what was to come alone. But the forest still whispered. Though the immediate threat had passed, Ilara knew the shadows were not gone, they were only waiting. And in the deepest part of the forest, something stirred, a presence older, darker, and more patient than any shadow she had faced before. It was aware of her power, and it would not be denied. Night fell, and they made camp near a small stream that wound through the forest like silver thread. The fire cast flickering light on their faces, highlighting the tension and exhaustion that clung to them both. Valerian spoke first, breaking the silence. "You have grown stronger today, Ilara, but the true challenge is yet to come. The forest tested you, yes, but it also prepared you, prepared us for what we must face next." She met his gaze, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "I am ready," she said softly, though inside, a storm of fear and anticipation still raged. He did not speak, but his hand brushed hers once, a fleeting touch that spoke more than words could. In that moment, the world outside the circle of fire and shadows did not exist. There was only trust and the unspoken understanding that their fates were intertwined, that they would face the coming darkness together. The night deepened, and the forest sighed around them. Somewhere in the distance, a howl echoed, reminder that the world beyond their circle was still dangerous, still unpredictable. But for now, in this fragile moment of calm, they rested. And in the deepest part of the forest, eyes unseen watched them, patient and calculating. The Omega's power had been awakened, and the reckoning had only just begun. The hook lingered in the shadows. Their trials were not over, and the storm that had followed them from the cursed valley had only grown stronger. The fortress bells tolled across the kingdom, echoing through the stone halls like distant thunder. The air was thick with tension. Word had come that the Cabal, those dark sorcerers who had cursed the valley and sought Alara's power, were marching toward the throne, their magic twisted and deadly. Valerian stood on the battlements, his armor darkened with soot and rain, eyes scanning the horizon. Behind him, the army prepared for battle, banners snapping in the wind, soldiers sharpening blades and murmuring prayers to gods they barely remembered. But Valerian's gaze was fixed on the forest in the distance. Somewhere within, shadows stirred. Something older, more powerful than any of the creatures they had faced before, awaited them. Alara emerged from the hall, her cloak damp from the early morning mist, hair tangled but eyes fierce. She had trained relentlessly in the forest, learning to harness her power to shape it without fear. She had faced herself in the circle of stone, confronted the darkness within and survived. And yet, as she stepped beside Valerian, she felt the weight of the coming battle. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, steady, but not without concern. Alara met his gaze, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. "I am," she said, "but I will need you. I cannot do this alone." Valerian's eyes softened slightly. He had seen countless warriors, countless soldiers, fall to fear, greed, or desperation. But not her. She had grown, not only in power but in courage. She had survived what many could not, and yet she had not lost herself. There was something about her that demanded respect, even from a king who had faced darkness his entire life. "Then we face it together," he said, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "As equals." The army moved through the forest path, approaching the open field that led to the valley where the Cabal had gathered. The ground was blackened, scarred from old battles, the remnants of magic lingering in the air like smoke. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the edges, bending toward Alara, drawn to the power that flowed within her. She took a deep breath, focusing her mind as she had been taught. The energy pulsed beneath her skin, a living thing that responded to her will. She raised her hand slightly, letting it flow through her, shaping it, guiding it, bending it to her control. The shadows recoiled, sensing the strength within her. Valerian stood at her side, his sword gleaming faintly with enchantment. "Remember," he said quietly, "we fight not just with strength but with strategy. We anticipate, we adapt, and we protect each other." Alara nodded, feeling the truth in his words. Every battle she had fought alone had ended in fear and exhaustion. But here, with him, she felt a strange clarity. Together they were a force, their strengths complementing one another. The Cabal emerged from the valley like a wave of darkness, their robes black as midnight, eyes glinting with cruel amusement. At their center, the lead sorcerer raised his staff, and the ground trembled with the pulse of forbidden magic. "You think you can challenge us?" he sneered. "This girl, this child of the forest, she is nothing but a spark, and sparks are easily extinguished." Alara stepped forward, her sword raised, her power radiating in pulses of light. "I am more than a spark," she said, her voice steady. and I will not let darkness claim me or those I protect." Valerian moved beside her, sword flashing, armor catching the faint sunlight that pierced the clouds. "Then you will see what happens when light meets darkness," he said. The battle erupted. Shadows and magic collided in arcs of light and dark, sending sparks into the sky. Soldiers clashed, spells collided, and the air was filled with the roar of combat. Alara moved with precision, her power flowing through her blade, striking shadows, dispelling illusions, and protecting the soldiers who faltered under the Cabal's attacks. Valerian fought beside her, each strike and parry precise, guiding the battle with the skill of a man who had commanded armies for decades. Yet even he could not fully contain the darkness. The lead sorcerer's power was immense, drawing on ancient magic that had lain dormant for centuries. Alara felt the pull of the darkness against her own energy, a test of strength, will, and courage. For a moment, doubt flickered in her mind. Could she truly control it? Could she wield her power without being consumed? Valerian's voice cut through the chaos. "Alara, focus. Remember the circle, the forest, the control you learned." She closed her eyes, recalling the lessons of the stone circle, the forest, the trials she had endured. She let the fear drain away, letting her power flow as a stream of light rather than a raging storm. The shadows recoiled, twisting and writhing as her energy shaped them, pushing them back, guiding the battle toward victory. The lead sorcerer's eyes widened. "Impossible," he shouted. "She should not be able to." Alara did not answer with words. She moved forward, her power flaring, striking at the heart of the darkness. The ground cracked, and the Cabal's magic began to unravel under the combined force of her strength and Valerian's leadership. One by one, the sorcerers fell, their spells dissipating into the wind, their power no match for the Omega's control and the Alpha King's skill. At last the lead sorcerer stood alone, his staff trembling in his hands. He raised it one final time, but Valerian's sword struck with precision, shattering the staff and sending a wave of energy that dissolved the last of the dark magic. Silence fell over the valley. The storm that had been gathering for hours dispersed, leaving the sky a soft, bruised gold. The army stood victorious, though weary, their breaths heavy, their bodies battered but triumphant. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. Valerian knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You controlled it, you overcame the darkness." She looked up at him, eyes shining with relief and pride. "We did it," she said, "together." For a moment the world felt still. The war had ended, the shadows had been banished, and the curse that had haunted her life was finally broken. Yet in that stillness, a new understanding passed between them. They were no longer simply king and Omega, soldier and survivor. They were allies, friends, and something more unspoken, fragile, and powerful. Valerian's eyes softened. "You have changed me," he admitted quietly. "Not just today, but from the moment I saw you fighting in the valley. You are remarkable." Alara felt a warmth rise in her chest. She had never heard words like that directed at her before. Not from a teacher, not from a friend, and certainly not from a king. "And you have changed me," she replied. "You taught me control, courage, trust. I could not have faced this without you." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley. The army began to move back toward the fortress, victory celebrated, but caution still alive in their hearts. Valerian and Alara walked together along the path, silent for a moment, the bond between them unspoken but undeniable. When they reached the battlements, they looked out over the kingdom, the sky now clear, the storm behind them. The wind carried the scent of earth and rain, fresh and alive. Valerian extended his hand to her, not as a king commanding a subject, but as a man offering partnership. "Alara," he said softly, "the world has changed because of you. So have I. Will you walk with me, not just as my ally, but as more?" Alara hesitated, feeling the weight of what was asked. Her life had been one of solitude, of struggle, of surviving alone. But standing here beside the man who had saved her, who had trusted her and guided her, she realized that she no longer wanted to face the world alone. She took his hand, a silent promise passing between them. "Yes," she said, "together." A breeze swept across the battlements, carrying with it the whisper of the forest, the echo of the valley, and the memory of shadows conquered. The kingdom was safe for now, but the future stretched ahead, full of challenges, responsibilities, and the promise of growth. They stood together, hand in hand, the weight of their past trials behind them, the strength of their bond ahead. The Omega and the Alpha King, survivor and ruler, warrior and mentor, had found something in each other that went beyond power or destiny, something rare, something enduring. And in that quiet moment, high above the kingdom, the sun breaking through clouds, there was hope. Hope that even in a world of shadows and curses, courage, trust, and love could shine brighter than any darkness. The storm had ended, but the bond forged in its heart would last forever.